So because I think that's an interesting point to make when we've looked at other coalition governments that have been formed in Europe, led by the far right. They've certainly had to, I don't know, neutralize or perhaps compromise might be the right term on some of their rhetoric. So give us some sense of what we should make of this swing to the far right. Is it being exaggerated in your mind, or is it a very real threat to Europe, especially since we've seen this gathering in Florence over the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's exaggerated in the sense that it's real, right? I mean, a lot of people, I think, kind of naively believed that with the pandemic, this would go away. Why? Because, I mean, the last thing you want in a public health crisis is to have amateurs in charge, right? You want serious people with expertise and so on, right? And I remember during the Brexit debate, the idea was people have had enough of experts telling us what to think, right? And so, of course, that was never going to be the case, right? So here they are. There's real appeal, but I'd say there's two different strands of right-wing populism in Europe, right? There's the strand that we saw with Orban, in that we still see Orban in Hungary and his Fidesz party. We saw it in Poland with Kaczynski's PIS party. These have an authoritarian bent, right? So they're hell-bent on limiting media freedom. They want to seize the judiciary, plant their judges in there, and basically reform the whole democratic system. That only works if you're a one-party government, right? With some sort of majoritarian system, meaning 40% of the vote gets you 60% of the seats. In many ways, the way the UK system works. Meloni, another example of a right-wing politician, the Italian prime minister who's in charge of a right-wing coalition, they immediately have to compromise with other parties, right? She governs with Forza Italia, the old party of Silvio Berlusconi. They're sort of more center-right, and immediately some of her wilder ideas, whenever it comes to challenging the European Union or the EU's authority on fiscal affairs, then quickly have to go. So my expectation in the Netherlands would be if, and I do say if, Wilders manages to cobble together a government, he will have to compromise a lot on many things, especially when they come to the European Union.
If he does not cobble together a government, does that mean another election?
No, that's actually never happened in the Netherlands. So what happens if he fails? So he, and I mean, not himself right now. So right now there's somebody who's exploring the options, right? An explorer. They call him, he's a social democrat, but sympathetic to a right-wing government. So he'll explore a kind of government between the center-right liberals, the new party of Peter Omtzigt, the former Christian Democrat, who's also closer on the sort of center-right, and then the citizen farmer movement, plus Wilders' party. They would have a very comfortable majority of I think 89 of the 150 seats.
So something will turn out.
Yeah. If that's not possible, the baton will be handed to the second largest party, in this case, the left, right? The Greens and the Social Democrats candidate, Frans Timmermans, the former commissioner for climate, and then he will try to put together a coalition. If that doesn't work, I mean, then eventually you run out of options, and then you would have to call new elections, but we're not there yet.
It's interesting that anti-immigrant also goes with anti-hardline stance, I suppose, on climate issues. I mean, that seems to be the two dominant issues right now. Let me, before I move on, clarify. When you talk about those two strands of far right, the authoritarian versus, I guess, the more democratic in some ways, is that authoritarian streak very much in sort of the former countries of the Eastern Bloc under the Soviet Union? I mean, you mentioned two cases that were.
Yeah, that's where we've seen it thus far, right? I mean, there was a bit of an authoritarian streak at the worst days of Boris Johnson, you could say, right? Where he wanted to ignore court rulings when it came to Brexit and things like that, which got a lot of people very anxious in the UK, but it got nowhere near to some of the things that Donald Trump was thinking about in the United States, for example. But you could see someone like Marine Le Pen in France. It's not clear what kind of what kind of right-wing government she would lead, right? She does have elements of both. That said, I think in more mature, more longer established democracies, it's harder, right? So it's not surprising that Orban and Kaczynski were successful in Hungary and Poland respectively, because these countries are relatively young democracies, right, from the early 1990s. So they have a kind of good, at the time of Orban coming to power, it was like a 20-year tradition, right? Of course, similar with Putin in Russia, right? I mean, he came to power after a 10-year experiment with democracy under Boris Yeltsin. So I think the shorter these experiments are, the more likely this authoritarian streak becomes.